Hello and welcome to another retro digital camera video. This time we once again have a camera that I've picked up locally from Facebook Marketplace. Today I will be looking at a Sony DSLR a330. I paid a fairly average price of $125 Canadian for mine. It came in a nice shoulder bag, with a spare battery, some accessories, and a Sony 75-300 zoom lens. My copy is in excellent condition and had a shutter count of just over 5,000 when I picked it up, which feels practically brand new given its age. The A330 was an entry-level DSLR originally released to replace the A300 in 2009, with an MSRP of about $650 with a kit lens, or $850 including a 55-200 kit zoom. It was the middle of a range of 3 DSLRs released at the same time, sitting between the A230 and A380. All 3 cameras were very similar and only had minor differences. While the cheaper A230 technically had a better viewfinder with greater magnification, the A330 added live view functionality and a tilting LCD. The A380 was similar to the A330, but had a higher resolution 14 megapixel sensor. Both the A230 and A330 share the same 10.2 megapixel APS-C sized CCD sensor carried over from the previous A300. While technically considered a compact DSLR, this is now the largest digital camera that I currently own. The body is much larger than newer mirrorless cameras such as my tiny A5000. But around the same size as other comparable DSLRs from the time. Being a larger camera means the A330 also weighs quite a bit more. The body is made completely out of plastic, but it still weighs in at 529 grams with the battery installed. Even though the body is all plastic, a good part of the front is covered in a nicely textured rubber material, and everything feels well put together and solid. The grip is something I'd like to mention in a bit more detail. It's definitely on the smaller side, and I feel most people won't find it very comfortable to use, especially with larger lenses. I personally found it alright, and had no issues once I learned to adjust accordingly. The camera isn't really meant to be held in the same way as other similarly sized DSLRs, but is better held in a slightly more vertical grip with the weight resting on your palm. This leaves your middle finger wrapping over the top of the grip and within easy reach of the front control dial. Also in the grip, hiding behind a glossy insert, is the IR sensor for the included remote. This camera uses the now discontinued Sony A mount, which was originally brought over from when Sony purchased Minolta. This means along with Sony Alpha mount lenses that use Minolta AF mount will also work natively on this camera. Adapters for attaching M42 lenses to Sony A mount are also available, giving even more variety for lens options. I will look at vintage lenses on A mount in a future video. For this video, however, I will be using only the kit lenses and mainly looking at the camera body itself. On the side of the mount is the lens release button, as well as a switch for auto or manual focus. And right above is the strong built-in pop-up flash. The grip side of the camera is fairly bare, only housing a small flap covering the proprietary DC-in connector that I've never used. The opposite side is quite a bit more interesting. Under a sliding cover is where you will find the mini USB and mini HDMI connectors, as well as both Sony Memory Stick Pro Duo and SDHC card slots with a physical switch to change between the two. These cards can only be used one at a time, only offering options for which type of card to use, not for redundancy or speed benefits. The bottom is where you will find the typical tripod mount and battery door. This camera uses Sony H-style batteries, which had an original rating of about 500 shots while using the viewfinder. though being nearly 15 years old at this time, the batteries will have inevitably shortened their lifespan. The power switch is located on the top, around the 2-step shutter button. Moving towards the left, there is a small button for the digital zoom teleconverter, available only when using live view, and a toggle to switch between live view and OVF. On top of the flash housing is a proprietary Sony Minolta reversed hot shoe mount, and opposite from the shutter button is the mode dial. The dial offers different scene options as well as all the typical auto and manual modes, and is recessed just enough that it's easy to turn when you need to, but won't accidentally change something when you don't want to. One thing you won't find on the mode dial, however, is any sort of video modes. The A330 is strictly a photo-only camera. Finally, coming around to the back is where you will find the rest of the controls and the display. Controls themselves are clearly labeled and the buttons are easy to press. Just below the soft rubber thumb grip is a typical multifunctional D-pad with delete and playback buttons further down. Above the D-pad is a function button. This is not a customizable function button, but rather a button to bring up the shooting function menu. On a small shelf above the display sits a button for exposure compensation that doubles as zoom when viewing photos, and the regular menu button. The display is a 2.7-inch 230K dot LCD panel that can tilt up 90 degrees or down 55 degrees. Definitely not the sharpest screen, though viewing angles were acceptable. Colors also looked punchy and accurate to my eye. But even with an ambient light sensor and auto brightness, outdoor visibility isn't the best. The OVF wasn't quite as good as some competitors, including Sony's own A230 released at the same time. Viewfinder coverage is 95%, meaning you won't be able to see the very edges of your frame, and magnification is just average at 0.74x. Switching to live view unfortunately drops that down to just 90% viewfinder coverage, cutting off even more of the frame. Interestingly, when you switch from the optical viewfinder to using live view, you are physically moving a mirror into the light path to the OVF, which then directs the image into a second, much smaller image sensor that shows the live view feed. While this does result in the image being displayed on the screen to be slightly soft, it also meant the A330's live view was quicker and didn't suffer from the slow autofocus that plagued live view modes on competing DSLRs of the time. The A330 powers on quickly, almost immediately showing you an information-filled display. This is a screen that I actually really like. Directly in the middle are scales for shutter speed and aperture, each labeled with images to assist in which settings to choose. Shutter speed is shown simply as a still subject for slow shutter and moving subject for fast shutter, while aperture is explained by using a subject with blurred backgrounds for open aperture and a landscape in focus for stopped down. If you don't really like how the info is displayed, pressing up on the D-pad will change to a slightly more advanced layout with a bit more information. Pressing it again will turn the display off. When looking in the optical viewfinder, Sony has opted to give us a little bit of information in some green text here too. You are able to see shutter speed, aperture, and exposure value here without needing to check the screen. All the way on the right, you will also see what looks like signal bars on a cell phone. This is actually a steady shot scale. The more bars, the shakier you are. When in live view mode, pressing up on the D-pad switches between detailed display, histogram, and minimal information. Live view is also the only time the smart teleconverter can be used, though most experienced photographers will likely avoid this button. Pressing the button cycles between a 1.4x and 2x digital teleconverter, which is a fancy way of saying the camera crops into the image. This can also be seen by the image size shrinking to medium and small respectively, and you're usually better off just cropping in post if needed. Just below the OVF, there is also a pair of sensors for detecting when you raise the camera to your eye. One sensor simply turns off the display when using the OVF to be less distracting and save battery life. The other sensor is for the iStart autofocus, which sounds fancier than it really is, and is something I ultimately went into the menus and turned off. Simply put, it detects when you put your eye to the viewfinder and automatically triggers the camera to autofocus. Lastly, before actually looking at pictures and talking about image quality, I'm going to take a quick look into the menus. There's technically two menu buttons on this camera, but we'll start with the one labeled Menu above the display on the top left. Pressing this will bring up the usual settings menu where you can change things like image size and choose to shoot either standard or fine JPEG, RAW, or both RAW and JPEG. Deeper in the menu, you can also find the option to change whether the front control dial controls the shutter speed or aperture. A neat little addition is the ability to choose from 4 different color theme options for the rear display. The second, and arguably more useful menu, comes up when you press the Function button. In here, you will find the options you'll likely access more often, such as focus and metering modes, white balance, and creative style options. There are 7 different style options available, each with its own short summary for its use case. During my time with the camera, I found I personally liked leaving it in vivid mode, which I've also been using on my other Sony Digicams. This brings us neatly into the photos I've taken. As with most of the cameras and lenses I look at, I've actually had this for about a year now, and it's just taken me longer than planned to actually finish my video. The photos I'm sharing here are all JPEG files straight from the camera, with no edits, and most were taken in aperture priority mode. I tried to use the camera for multiple different genres, and take it to a variety of different places to really get a feel for it. I personally don't think that CCD sensors offer a film-like experience, but I do agree it's a different kind of look when compared to modern CMOS sensors. I'm not going to go over it in this video, though seeing how I now have both Sony CCD and CMOS APS-C sensors, I'll likely make a comparison video in the future. ISO sensitivity on the A330 ranges from 100 to 3200. Being an older APS-C sized sensor, noise performance isn't going to be great. Images generally look good up to ISO 400, and I would occasionally use ISO 800 if the light was low, though color noise is more noticeable, especially when zooming in. Increasing ISO to 1600 or higher leaves images quite noisy and soft. Since the A330 I purchased also came with a 75 to 300mm zoom lens, I of course had to try some wildlife photography. While I did have decent reach, the A330 struggled with only being able to take approximately 2.5 frames per second. The lower FPS means you're more likely to miss a shot during fast-paced action. I'll also touch a little on autofocus here, though this would also be lens dependent, so I'll keep it short. In my experiences, the autofocus worked quickly and relatively accurately in most scenarios with little hunting. I did end up with missed focus more often than I might have liked when trying to shoot into thick trees with bright backlit sky, but most cameras would struggle there, and it's easy enough to switch into manual focus if the need arises. If I'm honest, the A330 wasn't a camera I was actually planning on getting. While I did want to get something with the Sony A mount, I was actually looking for something in the SLT range when I came across the listing for this one. But I was a bit impulsive and grabbed it anyway. In my opinion, the A330 is a nice camera and works well for its target audience. I really do enjoy using it and still take it out with me in place of my main A5000 at times. Though I don't know if I would personally recommend going to look for this camera specifically. I didn't pay a crazy amount for my copy, but for $125, you should be able to find a plethora of options for older DSLRs that would rival or even outperform this one. I hope you enjoyed the photos and possibly found this video either entertaining or maybe even helpful. That's it for this one, so until the next time, Thanks for watching.